So I want to start by just saying what a joy it is to be with all of you today. I see familiar faces in the chairs that are no longer pews. Rock on, everybody. I served, as Jane mentioned, I served 8 years at Michael Servetus, now Merging Waters. And that society, originally it was a society, actually stemmed from this congregation. So a group of folks who were in a book group in Fridley would drive down south to this building, and they would meet, regularly to study books. And they found a small Episcopalian church in Fridley. A group of them bought it, and Michael Servetus began. So this is kind of the root system of the congregation I served. And the building in Fridley, which is now part of the Turkish American Society of Minnesota, was a small Episcopalian church, kind of New England style, very charming. It had a sanctuary with one aisle and pews on both sides that fit about 4 people, maybe 5 if you smushed. We ended up selling the building just because it really was not accessible at all. But I was installed in this building because we couldn't really do an installation over there. And so where you see these pictures here, there were photos of folks from our congregations and of the small New England building sitting where these photos are today. So this place will always hold a special place in my heart. And so I'm very grateful to be here. I'm also grateful to Reverend Newland who invited me to talk today. And as I considered what I was going to share with you, my heart just kept redirecting me back to this topic. This faith tells us to be open to revelation, which in my mind means constant change, learning, and transformation. And we speak of being united in our broad and inclusive outlook and in our shared values of interdependence and pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity for all. And all of those centered in love. My adult life connected to congregations and nonprofit organizations have offered me lived experiences in all of those shared values. And I know that I am a better person because of it. I start today with a great deal of gratitude for the many beloveds in the trans and non-binary community of people of all ages who were teachers in my life, those who have lived authentic lives despite the hurdles and challenges that were set in front of them. And I start with recognition that because of their honesty and courage and creativity, I have moved from a clueless suburban child and young adult into a person who feels called to speak out and side with love. My talk today isn't about an abstract call to social justice. It's about grounding ourselves in beliefs of Unitarian Universalism, the privilege of living in this state, and in the hard and holy work that is being done by organizations and congregations as we respond and do whatever we can at this point in history. So Minnesota isn't a perfect state by far, we know that. But it has been a mecca of sorts for queer and trans folks for as long as I can remember. I moved here in '91, so that's how far my memory goes. So let me just cite a few historic moments for those of you who may not be aware. Over 30 years ago, what is now named Outfront Minnesota created a broad coalition and worked with legislators to pass a human rights bill with protections from discrimination in housing, public accommodations, and employment based on sexual orientation or gender identity. I don't think people were really using those words that much back then. It was and still is one of the most inclusive anti-discrimination laws in the country. And as many of you recall, after years of organizing and defeating a ballot measure, a bill was passed in 2013 making same-sex marriage legal in Minnesota. In between those two dates and beyond them, so much work has been done to create safe and affirming schools, medical care, communities, and workplaces throughout our state. And in March 2023, our legislature passed the Trans Health Refuge Bill. This is a proactive legislation that prevents state courts or officials from complying with child removal requests, extraditions, arrests, or subpoenas related to gender-affirming health care that a person in Minnesota receives. It's kind of frightening that that actually had to be passed. As our one out trans legislator, Representative Lee Finke, said, to all those families across the United States that are afraid and wondering where they can go for help, Minnesota is saying, we see you, we love you, and you belong here. And although our governor has not always sided with all the way on specific justice issues that we may want him to, he has been good in terms of trans policy. I was at the Capitol for Trans Day of Visibility rally in late March, and he held up a declaration saying that Monday, March 31st was Trans Day of Visibility across the state of Minnesota. And as he spoke to us, this small but vocal crowd he called out the current administration that has, as he said, chosen to demonize a marginalized community for their own selfish reasons. And he called us all, saying, now is the time to stand up. So we're fortunate to call this state our home. I don't take it for granted. And we can use that privilege to support others. When I was executive director back in 2006, 2007, Phil Duran was one of my co-conspirators, close to 20 years ago, I would regularly talk to my peers across the nation who ran similar organizations. We, here in Minnesota, had more parents involved in rainbow families who identified as trans than there were in San Francisco or New York. I know, it's kind of stunning. I mean, incisively more number of people. And I believe that the primary reason is that 50-year-old program in human sexuality at the U attracts people from across the country, trans adults and families with trans children. The program was actually given the status of being elevated to an institute in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health at the University of Minnesota in 2021. Their research and their educational endeavors are seriously a beacon of influence that is both international, national, and local in terms of policy and care. Faculty work to raise awareness of sexual rights as an inherent part of universal human rights based on freedom, dignity, and equality. And of course, many of you must be familiar that there are numerous organizations in our state that explicitly serve trans kids and families and gender-expansive folks and their families that live here. So we are truly fortunate. I have to say that prior to the November election, it felt to me like we were on the precipice of becoming a country where more of us would be included in that we of the United States of America. But as you know, we find ourselves now led by a fascist government that literally came out with an executive order stating that the policy of the United States, I just can't even believe these executive orders, is to only recognize two sexes, male and female. And we have a president that wears his hat with his campaign slogan to give the West Point commencement speech yesterday, where he continued anti-trans and anti-inclusion tirade. Not only is this ludicrous to think that the strike of a pen or hostile words can extinguish the identity of so many Americans, but it's cruel. And most importantly, it is dangerous for so many beloveds in our congregations, in our communities, in our country. I love the book that you heard earlier. It's just one that makes my heart sing. It's the world I want to live in. And I know that there is no way to stop kids and adults alike to come to know their true identities and to let them speak that out loud. We all know that the current vicious backlash of anti-queer and anti-trans legislation is unprecedented. Everywhere across the globe, across time, there have been battles of power and rights and access to who gets to shape the predominant narrative. And at the same time, this moment is so much more intense than I've ever known in my adult life. And so many beloveds who are in what are referred to as marginalized groups are being used as pawns in a dangerous strategic power grab by conservatives in power who are going unchecked by conservatives in other branches of government. Conservatives have the spotlight and the microphone, and they are loud and bold, relentless and far-reaching and strategic. Conservative leaders bring forth what the magazine The Nation calls underground streams of hatred into the light of legitimate political discourse. We must not allow their language or their laws to ever be seen as legitimate. Not on our watch. I wish I could tell you how to stop what is happening. We are all living through this rise of fascism, and fascism requires division and scapegoats and fear and terror, and that is the reality we are living in. So we need to breathe and take care of ourselves and look for moments of light and hope and service that we can provide to make this country what we want it to be and to take care of our beloveds. I am grateful to be a UU at a time like this because it's not just individual congregations that are embracing trans and gender expansive folks. At our foundation, we have articulated beliefs and values centering in love. At last June's annual Unitarian Universalist General Assembly, there was a vote on a resolution titled, our resolutions are titled very long names, so I'll say this a little slowly, Embracing Transgender, Non-Binary, and Intersex People is a Fundamental Expression of UU Religious Values. A fundamental expression. Thank you. Remember that, because I think it's important to remember what's fundamental to us. There's several pages of text, if you want to go read it, explaining kind of the history of past actions and resolutions. And there's an explanation about why it's important for us as UUs to proclaim our faith, that our faith unequivocally honors and celebrates the full spectrum of gender identity and expression. The resolution proclaims that being transgender or identifying with any gender other than the one assigned at birth is a beautiful and divine manifestation of humanity. I'll read that again since I fumbled a bit. Being transgender or identifying with any gender other than the one assigned at birth is a beautiful and divine manifestation of humanity. That's the world I want to live in. We know what is needed for people to thrive. We know what love, affirmation, seeing oneself mirrored and in others and receiving appropriate care can do for the development of people across all ages of the lifespan. For young people to know that they may have been born as one gender but are really another, gender-affirming care is imperative, and it is a basic right. Professionals have taken long, careful, ethical, and developmentally appropriate measures to assist children and youth and adults and families to gain life-affirming care. Don't let the conservatives tell you otherwise. Dr. Angela Cade Gepford, who's the Chief Educational Officer and Medical Director of the Gender Health Program at Children's Minnesota, says, "This care isn't new. This care is not fast. The care is evidence-based, and it is evidence-based. It is age and developmentally appropriate." She says, "The controversy around the care is new, and it has been constructed over the past few years. But this care itself is not new, and the care itself is not controversial. I have many beloveds who are what I would call liberal, but struggling a bit with, kind of what they've been hearing on the news, and I think it's important for us to gain some chops into how we can talk about what's happening in the world of our beloveds who are trans and non-binary and not let the conservative narrative rule the day. In every congregation I have served or participated in, I've known trans, gender fluid, and non-binary young people and adults who depend on gender-affirming care. It's not an abstraction. It's not something that's happening to them. These laws, although they are being blocked here in Minnesota, they impact our families, they impact our beloveds, and they impact us. As we've heard before, and we will say again and again, liberation tells us that no one is free until everyone is free. And the beloved among us who are trans and gender expansive are whole and holy. The lives of trans and gender expansive people are sacred and loving lives that make our lives much sweeter. So organizing to support folks who live in the states with hostile laws has been going on for years, prior to this recent election and administration, for sure. In October of 2023, local UU congregations were contacted by the coordinator for congregational activism at the UUSC, the UU Service Committee. The person who's the coordinator wrote to us and said that as many of you know, this was in 2023, as many of you know, our trans and gender expansive beloveds are being criminalized at unprecedented levels across the country, which has led to more than 100,000 people which has led more than 100,000 people to relocate already, 100,000 people, with many more looking to move to safer states soon. The situation is so dire that trans and gender expansive people qualify as internally displaced people, IDPs, according to the standards of the UN. She continued that UUs as a faith have been quietly responding to this need by following the lead of frontline trans organizers. Minnesota and the Twin Cities area in particular is a popular location for individuals and families who are looking to relocate. That was 2 years ago. Imagine the numbers now. That same year, in 2023, a number of UU congregations joined an online meeting with the representative from the UUSC and a trans organizer. Lisa Freeman, who serves at the UU Church in Minnetonka, and I were able to meet the two for lunch. The meeting was like nothing else I've ever been to in the past. I'm not sure if the trans organizer from the group Pink Haven ever actually gave us their name. And the way they talked about moving people who they called passengers felt like I was in the middle of a contemporary rendition of the Underground Railroad. Hostilities and harassment of queer advocates, service providers, and researchers has increased across the country. And there was great concern for the security of the organizers of Pink Haven, which is the organization we were meeting with. I have to say that it was disorienting and disconcerting. It made me realize how serious all of this was and is, and what risk people in some parts of this country are taking to be part of a hidden system that is getting people in hostile environments what they need. So I recommend that you Google the UU World article on Pink Haven, if you haven't already heard of Pink Haven, and then check out their website so you can learn more. Pink Haven is the organization that the Unitarian Universalists have been working with over the past couple of years. They describe their goal as we are a collective of organizations and individuals who are committed to trans liberation and joy and to growing community defense, mutual aid, and alternative systems of care for gender diverse people. A number of local congregations are currently hosting what we call rainbow refugees who have come from other states. Justice teams are rallying congregations to help with rent, setting up living spaces, transportation, connections to resources, and more. First Universalist, where I serve, is hosting a young person who moved here about 6 months ago, and we also just held a baby shower for a couple that recently settled into an apartment behind the church. Their baby was born that same week, and the congregation is supporting them in all ways possible. Feels like a drop in the whole ocean, but I believe, we got to kind of like, I don't know if you guys know that starfish story where like it mattered to that one. That's what I feel like every single one matters. So I hear that discussions are starting here to see how this congregation can be more actively involved in supporting folks who are coming here through Pink Haven. I imagine the numbers will grow as families and their individuals reach breaking points and that they find they need to leave their home states where they can find a place where that's less hateful, where harmful rhetorics and laws are no longer continuing to grow. Find a place like Minnesota. More people will come to the blue states with greater protections and access to care and community. I don't know about you guys, but I can't imagine having to leave your home as an immigrant, internationally displaced people, or as a person that recognizes that there are places safer than where I am right now, just across a state line. I felt a little bit of that before marriage equality, and I'm sure those of you who are queer understand what that looks like. But people create lives where they are connected to families and schools and churches and community and employment and friends. And when people come here, all of those are left behind for those families and individuals who decide to move to a safe state. Places where they can live and find reflections of themselves and community, and where their lives are not censored or forbidden. So here, We must remain diligent to continue to provide protection for our sacred and beloved trans folks and for their families who live here. If you do nothing else, I urge you to not remain silent about your support for trans folks and about how harmful what is happening in this country is. I recommend that you pay attention to the Unitarian Universalist Side with Love office, which is offering actions that you can take to counter what is happening, and they've also been offering monthly gatherings to help sustain us in this work. And if you find people in your lives who have been pulled into the lies and the false research and the straight, white, heteronormative, female athletes' fear and manipulation, I recommend that you check out the Transforming Hearts Collective, which is staffed by UUs and is UU adjacent. Our organization Moose Jaw, which many of you might be familiar with, the UU Social Justice Alliance, they're hosting a 3-part series in June online that any of us can sign up for that was created by the collective. I found their work to be really helpful in moving the needle for some folks and in opening them up to greater understanding and compassion. And literally, I was talking with my in-laws the other night about trans athletes. Again, we seem to hit this like every 2 months after they watch too much news. And they just, to wrap their brain around it, it just takes numerous conversations. We know that there are so many people in our country who do not want to see these extreme laws happening. But we all know that what Side with Love reminds us of, that is, majorities don't protect people unless we are active. Majorities don't protect people unless we are active. And this is life-saving, faithful action to stand up about trans rights. I see it as our religious imperative, and I hope you can find ways to act, whether that's in large or small ways. I really do believe silence isn't an option. So I hope you will join me in this journey of love centered around our shared values and in collaboration and in support of our trans and gender affirming siblings. May it be so.